Welcome to the Resilience Report, where we go beyond the headlines to spotlight the trailblazers redefining sustainable business. I'm your host, Lauren Scott. In each episode, I sit down with ecopreneurs and lighthouse leaders, visionaries, who are tackling our planet's toughest challenges and proving that business can be a force for good. Thanks for joining me as we explore what's possible and what's next on the path to a more resilient future. My guest today is someone I've wanted to sit down with since the early days of this podcast. And trust me, the wait was worth it. Jef Combdon is a 30-plus year marketing, communications, and media strategist who has built campaigns for some of Canada's most recognized names: Molson Coors, Kraft, Colgate, Maple Leaf Foods, and Newfoundland and Labrador Tourism, amongst others. He has operated the highest levels of both holding company and independent agencies across Toronto and St. John's. And then he walked away from all of that to build something entirely his own. MarkerTree is Canada's first and only social enterprise in the marketing communication space, a company with two mandates built right into its DNA: deliver exceptional outcomes for clients and use the profits to fund Mi'kmaq language reclamation. Jef is an active member of his community and has also co-founded an online immersion program working to bring fluency back to Newfoundland, where it had all but disappeared. What does that mean for you listening right now? Whether you're an entrepreneur questioning whether your work is aligned with your values, a leader navigating what reconciliation actually looks like inside a business, or someone who has ever had to choose between getting ahead and being fully yourself, this conversation will stay with you. Please help me welcome, after 3 years of wanting to have him on this podcast, Jef Combdon. Well, welcome back to another episode of the Resilience Report. I'm personally really excited for this episode because when I started the podcast 3 years ago, I had a handful of people that I wanted to eventually get to speak to. And our next guest is one of those individuals. I think I was waiting to get the podcast into the right state to have this conversation. And in parallel, this individual has also had different experiences and kind of expanded his own work that I know our listeners are going to learn so much from today. So with that, welcome to the show, Jef.
Well, thank you. I'm looking forward to it. It sounds like it's going to be an exciting conversation. So great.
So you've spent over 30 years of your career working at building some of the biggest brands in the Canadian world, if you will, from Molson Coors, KFC, beautiful campaigns for Newfoundland and Labrador. And yet, over the past few years, you decided to pivot from that space, despite having all the success, and to something that was really close to your heart. Can you maybe speak to that transition? And was there a moment in time that made you kind of jump towards that transition, or is it more cumulative?
So I started MarkerTree almost 2 years ago. Let's just say 2 years, round it up. And, at that time, it felt like I was making a sharp right turn. Even compared to some of my earlier career aspirations, it felt like an about face. I never desired to own my own company. I never, it was always, I just wanted to work. I wanted to climb my way to the top of the ad business and, work for a big, well-respected agency. But time has a way of flattening things out, and so now even when I look back 2 years, it's sort of like, it doesn't seem like such a sharp turn. It seems like it's just a bend in the road that my career trajectory has been kind of going along. So to get at your question, or to get the answer for your question, it's really like when I started in advertising, all of my early mentors really impressed on me the importance of committing to the industry. And they said, if you want to go somewhere in this business, you need to fully commit to it. And I did exactly that. And it's an industry where you kind of have to, because not only do you need to become an expert in your craft, right? If you're a copywriter, you need to be a great writer. If you're an art director, do that bit. And I'm a strategist and a planner, so I have to hone my craft and become good at what I do. But you also, you need to stay on top of your industry, and ever since the birth of the internet, this industry, it changes every day, right? So it's a lot of staying on top of, but that's also compounded with the fact that you need to become an expert in your clients' businesses. And so, yeah, so you mentioned, Newfoundland and Labrador Tourism, Molson Coors. I've over the span of my career, I've had to become an expert in, the automotive industry, the beer industry, the spirits industry, pharmaceutical industry. It goes on, and it doesn't leave a lot of time for anything else. And that's the commitment. And so you sacrifice all your personal desires in order to get ahead in this business. And I think over time, it was just more an act of me wanting to pull back a little bit and be a little bit more Jef and be a little bit more true to what I wanted to do. And yeah, so there's a few steps that I've made that have led me to this point where I'm at now. And yes, and it did come to the realization that, I wasn't getting enough of my 5 to 9 of doing, good. I wanted to do more good in my 9 to 5. And the only way that I could see in my current situation to do that was to start my own business. And even within that, to find not just start my own business, but structure it a little bit differently than everybody else. And, and that's what led me to setting up MarkerTree as a social enterprise. Because within that model, you can effectively serve two masters, right? Ultimately, every other business, you really just serve one master. If you're an agency that's owned by a holding company, you serve the shareholders, and that is it. If you're working at an independent agency, you're serving the owner who owns that business, or the leadership team who may share in the spoils of that. Whereas with a social enterprise is, okay, I serve my clients, but I also serve the cause that is important to me. And that's what motivates me to kind of get up every morning and get back into it, and take that extra time to stay on top of the crazy world of advertising.
I'd love to double click into the social enterprise side. We've had a couple of guests on who have been in that space, some in the financial area, others more in the consumer goods, but never really in this side. And I'm curious specifically around where you're going with this organization, because you've dedicated 51% of profits to Indigenous language reclamation. Could you speak a little bit more about that and what that even looked like in setting that up for MarkerTree?
Yeah, that part is still taking shape, and what it's going to become is still on the horizon. But yeah, starting with the number 51, it's kind of a magical number for me. It's a lucky number. It's a number that ever since I was probably 5, I really gravitated to it. Hockey jerseys, BMX racing, etc. So even to this day, if somebody knocked on my door looking for a pledge for a skate-a-thon or something like that, I always give $51 or $51.51 or something like that. And it's a way that I pass on my luck to them so they could do better. But outside of that part, within the business, that 51%, to dedicate 51% of your profit to something is very significant. Everybody talks about not having big margins and struggling to, and I'm going the opposite direction and taxing that even more. And I feel, why that is important is, if it's more than half, then it holds the keys to the decisions, right? And like every business, like right now, like April is the last month of my fiscal, and I might be looking at my numbers and say, yeah, I've got some money. I could maybe invest in this or, pick up this. But I always stop and weigh that, say, well, hold on, that is going to cut into my profit for this year. And that is where my fund is coming from. So is that the right decision? Is it the right decision to get that new laptop? Does that new laptop, will it pay for itself? So it just becomes a little bit of an extra decision making process for me to keep me focused on, yes, my language reclamation efforts as being the priority for the business. And then on a personal level, I've always believed that when you give, if it doesn't hurt to give, you're not giving enough. And that's kind of always been something that's guided me from day one. It's kind of like, anytime I'm giving to a cause, it's like I give big, and I have to go without in order to give, and that's when you're giving enough. So I wanted my business to kind of embody that.
As businesses are thinking about having that positive impact, I know that you've been pretty open that when it comes to reconciliation in Canada, for listeners who are not from Canada, there were a number of efforts, I think, done at a federal level, certainly within businesses, maybe about 5-6 years ago, where there was an increased emphasis. I cannot necessarily speak to where that stands today. Seems like a lot of companies were paying lip service, and maybe their DEI commitments were not necessarily having the necessary impact. If we have listeners who are tuning in and they would like to maybe take those steps in the right direction, especially maybe when it's not as, I don't even want to use that word, but it feels less trendy now than it was 6 years ago when I think all these companies were jumping on the bandwagon. So do you have any guidance there as to where they can do additional research?
Yeah. I'll first say it's sad to see the pendulum swing back, as far as it's going, on DEI, because I think it was it's critical. Even for the people on that spectrum who are villainizing it, it doesn't make sense to me. It's like, why don't you see strength in diversity? If you're going to build a hockey team, you don't build a hockey team with only defensemen. You need people who score, you need people who see plays and set up plays, and you need everything. And that's really what the strength in diversity comes from, is having people of different perspectives contributing to something, as opposed to people with the same perspective, just, doing the same thing. So it's sad to see where it's gone. But when it was on trend, and this is even prior to me starting MarkerTree, and that's when I started to become a little bit more vocal, was, I didn't want to see the obligations of what Canadian businesses have to First Nations people be rolled into DEI. It's a completely separate thing. If you have a business that either is from this land or is operating in this land, like this, lots of global companies that, are here, you have a service, you have a responsibility to the First Nations, Indigenous people of this place, right? The system that allows you to excel is the same system that crushes, the original people of this land. And so, yeah, and as part of the, the Truth and Reconciliation, the calls to action, number 92, it is, on the responsibility of Canadian corporations to further reconciliation with Indigenous people. And that was, so yeah, I was very vocal about that when DEI was kind of, on trend and getting talked about, and Indigenous stuff was being rolled into that. But it's sort of like, no, but you need to separate those two. And I believe, I believe that there's very positive solution for reconciliation, that doesn't have to be like a tax. It doesn't have to be like, a handout, or even a hand up. It's like they can be structured in a win-win, because when it's a win-win, and if then that's becomes sustainable, right? So when I started MarkerTree, I actually seen this as an opportunity where I could lean into that and help businesses navigate that space and create a reconciliation program that did achieve a win-win. Like, but for me, it's that's a really, really challenging line of business to pursue because, unless you're a company that's involved in resource extraction, there's probably no businesses in the country doing anything significant with Indigenous people to date. And in the 2 years that I've had my business, I've learned that, business doesn't care. Like, it's just part of I don't know, part of the fiber, the societal fiber that we're part of right now. But yeah, it is a challenge. So I still try to kind of impress on others that, they have a responsibility towards First Nations people and Indigenous people. But it is a really challenging space, and I just didn't want to see it get absorbed up by DEI, but ultimately it's just sad to see where things are shifting back to.
I completely agree with that pendulum observation, even less so probably here in Europe at the moment, but certainly on a global scale. As part of those challenges, I know you and I have chatted about sometimes having to step away from something or say no to something because it's not necessarily in line with what we're trying to achieve personally and professionally, and certainly not in line with our values. Have you had that experience within MarkerTree or even prior to then where you realized that, this is a great opportunity, but it's just not right for me?
Yeah. Prior to MarkerTree, I couldn't do anything about that. Like, it's sort of like I work for somebody else, and it's hard to impart your values onto an organization that's not yours. And so all you try to do is you find organizations that align with your values, and you hope that they continue to align with your values, and you hope that you could probably steer them gradually. But usually those values center around your core business offering, right? So I would align with agencies that believed in quality. I would align with agencies that believed in not robbing their clients, and et cetera, those types of things. But for other values, it's sort of like, you had to park that, which is unfortunate, but that's why I started MarkerTree. So I'm driving the bus now. And, so I create the rules. But I've only been in business for 2 years, so I haven't had a lot of opportunities. Most of the time where I can't work with somebody is because it's just a misalignment. They reach out looking for a logo, and it's like, well, I'm more the brand behind the logo, like the thinking, the strategy, not what you look like. But when I did start MarkerTree, I had kind of a couple companies that I had to say no thanks to. It's because of another issue that in Canada, there's a federal government procurement policy where 5% of all government dollars need to be spent through Indigenous businesses, and that whole system has just been horribly managed. It's wrought with fraud, when I first started up MarkerTree, I had a couple of immediate potential clients that reached out, and they just didn't smell right to me. They just didn't seem like, are you looking for me to legitimize you so you can go after this money? And so, you know what? I don't want to go there. No, thanks. And there were a few telltales, like, one business wanted a Mi'kmaq name, and they didn't care about the meaning of the name. It's like, come on, really? Like, is it, you just want something, you're just checking a box? And, so you could kind of, you can ferret out, the box checkers and the people who are doing something that's meaningful. It's a complex area. Indigeneity is very complex, especially in the whole pretendian stuff, right? I'm mixed race, but I identify as Mi'kmaq. I am Mi'kmaq. But that brings complications, right? And so a lot of settler businesses don't understand those complications, and yeah, but I haven't had to turn down too many. It's just kind of it's the initial bit. Even with that, everything's cyclical, right? The fraud gets exposed in that system, and then the fraudsters move on to something else, right? It's the unfortunate reality of the world that we live in.
If we rewind a little bit to when you and I were originally crossing paths, it was between 15 and 20 years ago in the advertising media space. I remember at the time, sustainability more broadly, which is where my interest was not necessarily a big part of the conversation.
Yep.
To your point, I feel like it maybe ebbed and flowed a little bit. Where do you feel like that industry is today in 2026? Do you feel like there was any more intentional alignment to have that values-based alignment, or do you feel like wherever customer trends are going is necessarily where they have to go, especially with those thinning margins in, I'd say, the past 4 or 5 years or so within that space?
I think you could look at everything and you could say everything could do better. Like, everyone could try better and they could do better. Within the ad business, I don't think that a lot of companies, a lot of agencies really, really embody anything other than I'm here to make money. I'm here to, or I'm here to do great work. Those are the two things that motivate those agencies, right? It is an industry that's dominated by holding companies, and that has brought a whole host of problems to the industry. And so I look at those companies and I say, you could do a lot better. Because when you really boil it down, you might think, oh, he's going cuckoo here. But, I look at holding companies almost like colonizers, right? They are designed to extract wealth and exploit labor and extract wealth. Right. Every client who works with a holding company owned agency, that's what they're working with. Right. And when your business model is that, you need to do a lot more, and you need to do a lot more than give your staff the afternoon off so they can go pick up garbage. Right. Because that's what you usually see on LinkedIn being shared. Or we went bowling and we raised some money. Like, they're nice things. I don't mean to do, poo-poo that, but it's like, no, I really, you could embody something better and bigger than what you're doing. But then on the flip side, where agencies really do play a role within the whole cause space is they help make causes famous. Some of the best work in the industry is cause-based, right? And the reason why it's the best is because, the creative agencies they've got creative control, a little bit more creative control over what's being said and what's being done. And they realize that, you don't have a lot of money. So we need to break through with this one impression. We need to, and so there's some wonderful ad campaigns out there that are all very memorable, sick kids and so on. And those, so as an industry, I think the industry's doing well within its sandbox. But I do think from a business side, the industry could do better. And we could all do better. And my starting MarkerTree wasn't like, oh, I want the industry to follow and become more cause, but it is a realization of, what is their core role? And if their role if their role in all this is to help make those causes more famous, then okay, great. Let's lean into that. So I try not to be too judgy in life, but try to see again, a Mi'kmaq principle, a duoptimum, because two-eyed seeing. And so I like to see things from both perspectives and try to find, where's the good and where's the bad in that.
Okay. I appreciate you bringing that lens, because I think I maybe am a little bit too jaded, but you're right. From a cause-based perspective, there has been incredible work that, having been involved in nonprofits, you just typically don't have the budget. So you need that high impact. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
And as we think about having that positive impact, it really takes a shift from thinking about next quarter's earnings and thinking longer term into future generations, even past generations. We've had a couple of guests in the past discuss the seventh generation principle, which does embody elements of that. But I would love if you could speak to the concept overall for our listeners who are maybe less familiar, and any iterations of that really speak to you.
Sure. No problem. So first, to give credit where credit is due. So the seventh generation principle is not Mi'kmaq. It's from the Haudenosaunee, who the Haudenosaunee, who are also known as the Iroquois Confederacy, I think it's 5 or 6 different First Nation groups came together. They share a common language, and they came together to be a stronger entity together. And so because they're representing, 6 different perspectives, they had to formalize more of their decision-making things. So they came up with the seventh generation principle. It's one of those things, there's quite a few from an Indigenous perspective that get adopted by other Indigenous groups and people. Because it aligns with your worldview, and it's a good articulation. So why not, right? And so the seventh generation principle, to kind of put it simply, is, when it comes to making important decisions, you don't look at just the impact that's going to have today. Like, and this, the wild part is to think, how is this going to impact the next 7 generations to come? And that's what should guide your decision making, right? Which is a really, really refreshing, way to look at it, especially in the baby drill world we're living in right now. That decisions could be made with that much foresight. Right. We're living in a world of short-termism, and that is part of the problem that's swirling around everything. And it's just a wonderful principle. And just to power that up even more, many First Nations groups and people, including the Mi'kmaq, believe that time isn't linear, and it's cyclical. And so those decisions not only should be made to think about the next 7 generations to come, but also to think, does this respect my ancestors? Does this respect their wishes and what they wanted to see? And when you work that into your decision-making process, you can only come out with good decisions, as opposed to, drill, baby, drill.
It is a catchy campaign, though, but looking forward and the bigger vision, we do have a lot of listeners who are entrepreneurs and who are trying to disrupt their respective industries, and it's not always easy. I think the vision that we have for what we're trying to accomplish and then the day-to-day reality, it can often feel like there's an important gap between the two.
Yep.
You've been really honest in chatting before this that you feel like maybe MarkerTree has taken a little bit longer to hit its stride, or that it's been a little bit more challenging perhaps than you had expected. If we do have listeners who are maybe just embarking on the entrepreneurial journey, are there any learnings, especially from the early days, that you would want to share with them?
Yeah. I kind of hinted at something earlier, and it was sort of like, for me personally, and this shouldn't really have been a surprise, but you get caught up in the momentum, and you mentioned DEI, and it was lots. So there was some good momentum that when I entered the market, and then it kind of I came back to the same realizations. Businesses don't care about Indigenous people. Businesses don't care about social enterprises. It's a nice, and it's not that they dislike that. It's just, businesses are making decisions that impact their bottom line. They impact the life and sustainability of their business. And so I guess, the realization is, okay, you know what? I'm not for everybody. And I have to acknowledge that. is that I'm not going to be for everybody. And so I'll try knocking on as many doors as I can, but I'm not going to be, you know, I'm not going to be thrown off by, getting the door slammed in my face. And just keep focused on, trying to find the right people that you are for, and try to make a difference there. So I think that's probably the biggest universal takeaway. And no matter if no matter what, part of, what your drive is for, for me, it's about, Indigenous culture and reclamation. And, so that's it's powerful and personal to me. But you're in a business setting, and so you have to acknowledge that, that passion exists with me, and it might not exist with the clients I'm trying to convince, to work with me. So you still need to do, a good job at your core offering. And even though you're, like for me, I'm Indigenous, it's an Indigenous business. Working with me could also be, an effort of reconciliation. There's a lot of good things, and to know that your money is going to go towards helping funding language reclamation. But at the end of the day, it's still about business. And so you just gotta keep trying to find who you are, good for, and not to be discouraged by it. Because for me, even though it's only been 2 years, there's been moments of, why am I at this, right? And I just get up the next day and keep trying.
Part of that journey as well, you've mentioned possibly contemplating another offshoot with Indigenous tourism.
Yep.
I think this is such a fascinating angle, one which I'd never admittedly thought too much about, but I could see huge interest in this. And in one way in particular, I've been reading a lot about how what this next generation is going to be craving is in-person experiences, that we're all kind of fried from being online. We want to connect with community. We want to learn in person. So I see that being such a beautiful extension and needed in the space. Could you share where this thought came about, and then where you're hoping to go with that as part of kind of broader reclamation efforts?
Yeah, absolutely. It dovetails nicely, to where things are, to the flow that we're talking about here, is because, that's part of my realization. Is like, okay, well, it's difficult for me to really raise the money that I want. I can only scale myself up so much. I only have so many hours of the day, right? So it's about finding, well, where can I get more margin? So if business doesn't really necessarily care that I'm a social enterprise, or they don't necessarily care about my cause or who I am or whatever, who does, right? And it's about finding your market. And fortunately, in my ad world, I've been involved in the tourism industry for the last 14 years. And living here in Ktaqmkuk, Newfoundland, I'm very active in sort of the core tourism product that exists here, right? It's hiking, it's nature, it's, which also connects with me culturally. So it was kind of like that. It's a bit of a win-win that kind of just presented itself as to say, hey, I wonder, from a social enterprise perspective, from language reclamation perspective, from reconciliation, and just from knowledge, people want to learn about, other cultures, and heck, cultures from the place that they may live. It just seemed like a perfect extension for me. So I'm kind of in the process of building that up and piloting that business, and this summer is my plan to kind of really kind of kick off that pilot to see, can I make more money for my cause in that space, by going straight to consumers, because consumers on vacation who want to learn, who want to learn a new culture, a new experience, to feel enriched, to learn about a little bit of history that's not told. Yeah, they might find that to be a strong offering. And then frankly, if you go back to your very first question about me and my career trajectory, I've been bit by bit pulling back a little bit more Jef, a little bit more Jef, and that potentially could be, the destination that I'm actually working towards, is offering kind of a guided hike experience where I teach people traditional medicines and history and the interesting the nuances of colonialism here in Newfoundland is very different than the rest of Canada. So that story needs to be told. And I just think, it's just a great offering. And my company's goal is to raise money for language content creation. Well, I might be more successful in that space than trying to convince, the General Motors of the world that, they should be working with me. So, yeah. So it's a little bit of a pivot, but it might not be, just seems the way that it's moving.
Just to double click into that for a moment too, because you shared the other day, for our listeners, follow Jef. His content is phenomenal. You were sharing about the words that are used within the Mi'kmaq language and how closely they are connected to nature. It almost feels like there's a natural extension too. And I was sharing that I find it so hard to express how important and how connected I feel to nature in English or in French. But you were saying that there's actually a very beautiful thread that you can pull there.
Yes. It's that is I think that what you're touching on is actually part of the spark that's, for me to learn the language. Part of it is it's a culture that it's something that I didn't have the opportunity. It was taken from me to learn. So it's about taking it back, but it's also a little bit of, preservation, because, for a lot of languages, words are just words. But the more I learn Mi'kmaq, the more Mi'kmaq words I learn and the root words of where those words came from, it's just like they hold like a little million aha moments, and everything almost everything links back to nature. Like the word sesubeg means it's slippery. So if I was out hiking with, my wife, and it's a little icy this time of year, which, in Newfoundland, we live with a lot of ice. I might say sesubeg. And that's, hey, careful, it's ice, it's slippery there. But the root of that word actually came from observing otters going into the ice, and so you knew that's where they went in, but they didn't come back out because it's slippery, so when I learn little things like that, it's like, wow, these, the generation that knows this knowledge, and it's very sparse, they're passing on, and that's part, that's part that I think, it puts a little bit more urgency on learning the language, either myself or helping others learn the language, because the more that we learn it and the more questions we ask, the more opportunities we get with an elder, we can understand the meaning behind those words and how they, and it constantly reminds me of how connected we are with nature. There is there's a Mi'kmaq phrase, "Msit Mnogama," which means all my relations. And a lot of Indigenous people will say all my relations. And what it really means is that we believe that all living things are interconnected. We're all people. It's just, I'm a human, and, Woquist, the fox, he's a fox, but we're related. And that's, it's a really good principle that, it just helps really kind of ground you as to, where we are and where we come from. And it's all nature. So when I learn the language, I feel very connected to nature. I feel connected to my ancestors. I feel, and it's just a reminder that, we're in a place and we need to coexist with our surrounding, and that is nature, right? As opposed to dominating it, which has been done. It continues.
It continues, and we see how that's resulting as well. We often talk about identity on this podcast and how people fit in within their businesses or communities. You operated in maybe not corporate America, but corporate Canada for decades. Did you ever feel that you had to have almost a separation of self from that corporate world, from who you are as a Mi'kmaq person, or was it more that you were able to compartmentalize a little bit in that experience, and then that maybe that voice just got louder as you were saying you wanted to get closer to Jef?
Yes. It's I learned at a very early age that if I didn't want to be bullied, if I wanted to be picked on somebody's softball team, I'd stay out of the sun. It was sort of like, right? Stay as pale as I could be. My father is Mi'kmaq. My mother is mostly Welsh. And I grew up in an urban setting, not on a reserve. So it enabled me to kind of, toggle, be more white facing, and less, it's kind of interesting. I look back now at that and I have a little bit of shame for doing that. You feel a tiny bit of shame because, you kind of turned your back on your ancestors. You turned your back on who you were, for whatever reason. I want to get on the softball team, or I want to get ahead in this industry, this advertising industry, or I want to do well in school. But then, when if I look at it in a different light, it's like, like the Mi'kmaq people, are, Catholicism is throughout, Mi'kma'ki. And, when I was younger, I said, well, that's kind of like turning your back. Like, why would you do that? And one word comes up, it's survival. Like, you need to do whatever you can to survive. And that's what they did. That's what they did then when they accepted Catholicism. They might have been thinking about the creator, Gazulk, or, but they accepted that, and that became who they are. So when I look back at my youth, when I stayed out of the sun so I wouldn't get dark, that was a part of survival. It's like, who wants to be bullied their whole life? I grew up in Scarborough, which is a very, very multicultural place in Ontario. But the neighborhood I grew up in was very white, very affluent, and very racist. And it's just like some of the stuff that I'd seen in the 70s, just, it's crazy. But those are things that I seen. So I needed to survive. And when I started in advertising, or even when I went to college to get into advertising, you occasionally hear some off-color remark or comment or something like that. And it's just like, oh, okay, I'm corporate Jef. I'm ad guy Jef. And I think, and even that, being told in my early days that you need to commit to this almost gave me an out. It's like, okay, well, I want to get ahead. I want to go to the top. So I need to be that industry and put all the other things aside. But I'd say as I've grown in the industry and gotten a little bit more of a voice, that's when it's sort of like, okay, that's my opportunity to, be more vocal and to stand up for, my culture, my people, and others. So I totally, it's a mixed thing. And I think everybody of any, race has a similar experience, like in in North America, which is a white society, people have to play within that space. And it just comes back to survival and resilience and preserving who you are for tomorrow. You have to adapt a little bit.
I really want to be conscious of your time, but before we go, I do want to ask you about your work with KMFP, because I know that this is also really important. I don't know how you find all the time of your day, but if you can share a little bit more about that, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. So KMFP, which is the Ktaqmkuk Mi'kmaw Fluency Project, it's a not-for-profit that me and a few other people on the island created, and we have a goal, and that is to bring fluency of the language back to Newfoundland. Our last fluent speaker passed in the 90s, and we want to bring it back, and that's our core mandate. So we created an online school, which we have about 250 students at different levels, all progressing towards fluency, which is amazing. And because it's online, it's accessible to anybody and anywhere. We've got people as far away as Hawaii, logging in every week, and the school is twofold. It's not just an online school, but what we try to do as well is we have mini immersion trips where we take people to Unama'ki, which is Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, and we visit different reserves. We do some land-based learning, and it's amazing when you're put into an environment where you're hearing the language and you could use the language openly without having to explain how quickly you excel in your learning, and then even how recharged you come when you're after the immersion trip. You just plow yourself back into it. So it's a great little model, and that was kind of the beginnings of MarkerTree. Started with KMFP, and through that experience, I believe it's the responsibility of every level of government to help the language come back, to help fund those efforts. But where MarkerTree comes in is more, it's about what's the destination? When people learn the language, what are they going to do with it? Is it something that you just use, at the annual Mawiomi, which is the Mi'kmaq word for a powwow, like a gathering, and so MarkerTree was, okay, well, I want to help fund content creation and to have that as a destination. Where are the books? Where are the shows? Where are the websites, the news, all those things in the language, for people to embrace it. It's KMFP is a wonderful organization and a good experience. Even just from running the organization, we try to do it with an Indigenous governance style, where it's consensus based, which I find always I'm running up against, because I'm part of the business world that is not consensus based. And so, I just want to push something through, and it's like, well, no, that's not how it works. So it's a great experience on so many levels.
And then just quickly, because you are so deeply involved in these different areas, have you found tools for your own toolbox over the years to refuel yourself so that you can keep on coming back to the work? I'm going to guess hiking and connecting with nature is part of that. But if there's anything that you can recommend, because again, I think we have a lot of listeners who are in the impact space, and sometimes it can honestly be a little bit draining when you care so much about what you're trying to do.
Yeah. Your guess is 100% spot on. For me, my salvation, where I recharge, what keeps me focused, is to get back out on the land, to connect with nature. And it's interesting. It's not hiking. Hiking is traveling somewhere. And I go for hikes, but I also will go do the exact same hike, but for different purpose. And if that purpose is connection, I move a lot slower and I try to be part of that environment. And it's just amazing, the time that you take away. And even if you take your problems with you into that space, you use that space to try to find the answers, right? And I tried, as much as I try to bring technology with me on that journey. So I'll go in the woods and I'll be mic'd up with, a wireless mic, and I'm recording, I'm talking to myself, I talk to the trees, I talk to, a doo-doo edge, which is a squirrel. And it's just a place where, even brainstorming for ideas, get out of the boardroom, get out of that sterile box that you work in and go back to nature and let the scents, the smells of the forest, and the oxygen that you're getting out there, right? There's so much scientific benefits of being out in nature. Use that as your strength and come recharged and get back at it. So that's my primary place.
Well, I know at this point, our listeners are going to want to learn more about you and your work. Are there any places that you'd recommend that they go check out?
I'd say you have to follow me on LinkedIn. I get sporadic with the content I share. There's dark moments where I'm busy working, but in key months you'll see more thinking for me, like in the month of June, where it's Indigenous History Month. I make a point to constantly sharing a lot of content during that month. Other, specific dates. Of course, I'm on Instagram, a couple different handles in that space. But primarily I'd say within this context, follow me on LinkedIn and, that's it.
Well, it's been amazing to follow you so far. I can't wait to see the evolutions. And if you do set up the tourism, hopefully by the time I'm back in Canada, I will be one of the first to get in line there as well. I do love to end every episode with the same question, which I would love your thoughts on as well, which is, what do you think it will take for businesses and leaders to be resilient going forward?
Okay, so my last question, and I'm just going to follow through on the theme, is, I look to nature for solutions, and resiliency. Resiliency is really it's so critical that you'd find a way to overcome your challenges, to stay the course. So I'll just say, be like water. Water finds a way. If you're ever hiking somewhere where you can see the impact of what water has done to mountains, what water has done to flatland, carving valleys, it's a powerful force. And sometimes when I do feel like I've hit a wall, or I've encountered something, I try to think to myself, be like water, find a way. Whether it's, water trying to leak its way into my house or carving a valley, it's probably the most resilient thing on the planet. And so, be like water.
Thank you so much, Jef. I'm so glad that we made this work, and I'm so excited to continue to watch where you go next with your journey.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I had a great time, and wish you the best too.
I hope that you've enjoyed this week's edition of the Resilience Report. If you would like to hear and see more, be sure to check out @The Resilience Report on YouTube, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Until we connect again, remember, even on the darkest of days, we all have the opportunity to be a lighthouse for others as we collectively pursue better, more resilient business.